Also, thanks, Mark Metry, for joining me.
Of course.
Um, so your situation is that you were plagued with social anxiety a few years
Hmm.
back, and it got to the point where it was pretty bad. And you had mentioned in a lot of places where you tell your story that you actually contemplated suicide. And then
Yeah.
you went from there to kind of kicking off this awesome podcast where you talk to hundreds of really cool, amazing people. Like some of the ones that I quickly noticed were like Vishen from Mind Valley, Neil Patel, Seth Godin, and just a bunch of names. Everyone's gonna find a few names that they really love in that
Yeah.
list. You've become a coach, a speaker on social anxiety. You have a course on overcoming social anxiety. You
Hmm.
have a TEDx talk. I
Hmm.
listened to, and you released a book recently, Screw Being Shy. So you're doing
Yeah, man.
so many things. How'd you get to kind of that darkest, lowest, deepest spot to doing all this stuff and doing it so well, and just speaking so well and so clearly and concisely? You just, being what you are, what you're doing today.
Yeah. Yeah. So in 2000, like at the end of 2015, that was like my dark moment. And then I started to climb out of that in 2016, slowly but surely. And I mean, really, like the answer to it is just like it's just every day. Like I just every day I just live the message, like I didn't really start talking about like my story or even social anxiety maybe until like the beginning of 2019. And so for me, it was just like interviewing people. It was just trying to learn. If you go back and you listen to my first episode on my podcast, it was absolutely terrible, but then I ended up hosting over, I don't even know at this point. I've posted over like 700 podcast episodes at this point. I've been a guest on like two, 300.
Mm.
So I've spoken probably over like 100 times. Um, I write personally for myself, but then I also have like a newsletter and like I have a book. I write like every day, so it's honestly just like a combination of like living the message first in like your real life and then just like trying to put that out there as many times on the internet. And then you just like do that today, and then you do that tomorrow, and then you do that the next day. And then you look up like 4 or 5 years later and you're like, oh shit, like what have I done? You know?
Yeah, I mean that's crazy. How'd you get from like what was that decision to from kind of okay improving yourself, right, figuring out how to kind of work with yourself to get better, to how did that manifest itself to okay, I'm going to start a podcast? Then how did that slowly turn into okay, wait, like I'm doing this, maybe I'll start helping other people with this? Like what was kind of
Yeah.
the transition like at each step?
Yeah. So I mean it's kind of the same thing because I remember um like I would say like I started like my self-improvement, self-development journey in like 2016. Um and then by like the middle of 2017, I was on my journey. And, for anyone else who's on the journey, like, it's very, it's great, to improve yourself, but it's also very hard. It's very challenging. And especially, when different people around you like don't understand, it can get very, very lonely and not so great, So I remember it was like the middle of 2017 and I was just facing that. And I remember I went to this park that was near my house and I was going there for like a run. And I remember like I was just kind of lost. Like I was like, man, I don't know what to do next. I was having different issues with like my physical health, my mental health, different issues with my business. So I honestly was just like, I really don't know what to do. And so for me, I was like, what is something that I can do to help myself, not only now, but in the future? So then I was like, you know what? I feel like the most times where I learned is when I just like sat down with somebody and I could just have a conversation with them one on one, especially if they're doing something that I want to be doing. And so I was like, you know what? Let me try to like start this podcast thing. Not from the perspective of like, oh, let me help people. Literally had nothing to do with that. It was literally just like, how can I, talk to people, and like what really happened was that anytime I was really interested in any kind of a topic, whether it was like, meditation or psychology or whatever it was, I was just like, okay, who are like the top 10, 20 experts, people in the world that are like experts in this field? And then how can I get them to talk to me? And at that time, nobody knew who I was. And so I was like, hey, let me start this podcast.
Yeah.
So, that's like the same exact reason why I'm on this, call with you. Like, I have 100,000 followers on LinkedIn. I get so many messages. I honestly don't see a lot of them. It's like my biggest problem right now. But like a lot of times someone invites me on the podcast. I'm like, oh yeah, sure. Let's do it. So it was just like very much like a mechanism and a tool to like help myself, honestly. And then I did that through the weeks, the months, the years. And then towards the end of 2018, my podcast started to become a bit successful. It started like ranking, high. I was starting to get on like different guests, like Seth Godin, I remember, was at that time. So then all of a sudden, like my podcast kind of went viral on like LinkedIn. And then all of a sudden, all kinds of people started talking to me on the business side. And then eventually it wasn't probably until like 2019 where I started to actually realize that like, oh, I have a story, and like, oh, social anxiety. And there's a lot of people who face this. And then I just got to a point where I was just like, man, I'm like pretty successful myself. Like I don't need to work on myself. And I mean, of course we always have to work on ourselves all the time, but it got to a point where it's just like, okay, I'm successful, but like now let's try to make other people successful. You know what I mean? And so it's very interesting, so my podcast is very much a journey of just like my own self-development, but then I also happen to like record it. And then like, millions of people, millions of downloads later, it became a thing.
Yeah, it is quite like, I think like when